Hello and welcome to the Wild Dispatch. I'm Robin and I'm here to serve up another portion of skills and stories from the wild. Today we are picking the brains of a mycological mastermind whose name is Billy Sprague. In this episode we hear his story and also try and tap into the mountain of hard-earned wisdom that he has built over the years in the mushroom woods. I'm excited to share this episode with you. On with the show.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.
Billy Sprague, welcome to the Wild Dispatch.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and it's an absolute pleasure to get you on board, man. I've spoken to a few people out there in the woods who are foraging and getting tips from people in passing. And a consistent thing that they've told me is that I should be speaking to you. You've gained quite the reputation in the area. So that's why you're here. And I'm so grateful that you're able to come on the show and I can pick your brains and learn from you about the whole world of the mycological underground. I guess that sounds sinister, doesn't it?
Well, that's good. I don't know. It sounds like maybe you're hunting in my backyard or something like that if everyone's pointing you in my direction. But, I get out there. I get a little, I like to go deep and explore all kinds of areas. And I love meeting people out in the woods, too. And it does happen from time to time. But I think just being heavy in the local mushroom scene through different foraging groups and the Mendocino Coast Mushroom Club and stuff like that tends to lead people to know who I am just from me being active in those groups.
Yes, I've definitely more than once jealously seen some photos that you've posted of huge hauls of, I think the latest thing was lobster mushrooms. There's been a big, well, by your account, not a big.
Last year was better, but they're out there.
I saw you with like so many lobster mushrooms in those pictures, but I mean, yeah, I guess it's all relative.
Well, I'm glad you're smiling about it because really, I'm not trying to. Honestly, I'm not trying to brag with those kind of posts. I'm just trying to inspire to show people that. Look at the abundance that's out there and get out there and try to find your own bounties. It doesn't matter what size, really. It's just more that they're out there.
Yeah. And it's true, man. They are. They're out there. And I think with a bit of know-how and a bit of patience, that's the amazing thing, right? That there is so much food out there. It's something that another friend of mine once told me is like, oh, there's these certain things you can worry about, but like there's just so much food out there, and when you know what you're doing and you have that feeling of confidence and it grows, that's a pretty great thing. But yeah. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay, all right, pull it back.
No, it's so what I'd love to hear though is like, I mean, obviously you're in Northern California, you don't live too far from me, and you spend a lot of time out in the woods finding these amazing hauls of mushrooms at all times of year. Well, not all times of year, but even now in these kind of brief moments of rain, there's been some popping off. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to hear a bit more about your story. Like from our brief conversation before, you've always had an awareness and a connection with the outdoors. And I guess it'd be great to just go back to the beginning and hear the kind of journey that you've been on.
With the outdoor stuff, I guess, I grew up in Michigan, Southwest Michigan, not a super small town or anything, but Kalamazoo. But there's woodlands all around, and I've got aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff that lived out in the outskirts, and it was a little bit more wooded and forest regions.
Yeah.
Where they lived, and so we played a lot in the woods. We carved little BMX trails in forest and did come across mushrooms from time to time, most notably like giant puffballs is what I
Oh,
remember seeing as a kid.
really?
Yeah, they're kind of hard to miss. Um, but
And did
then,
oh, go on. No, go ahead.
then just kind of like getting into scouting, eventually Boy Scouts, and just I love learning all the skill sets, like tying knots and first aid and all the stuff. But mostly, I was there just to sign up for every damn camping trip that popped up, any canoeing trip, and getting out of my area and going on these like little journeys to go check out other woodlands and other states and other regions and um,
That's cool.
got into or just like really feeling comfortable in the woods and getting a good sense of direction, which is like it's super helpful. But I gotta say, like as I got older, moving into larger cities, and doing less of the nature thing, or even if I'm still doing nature, hikes and stuff like that in the cities, they're kind of more bigger parks with established trails. You're coming across people every few minutes, or
Yes.
it's not as there's not as much solitude in it, and unfortunately, segueing into that sort of lifestyle kind of pulled me away from me being feeling more centered and at one with nature and the woods and my sense of direction, and all those things kind of slipped away a little bit.
Yeah, I can completely understand, and I absolutely can relate because that definitely was a process I felt too. Being not in a very very wild area, but being close enough that I had constant access to outside places. And growing up, my family, my parents were very outdoorsy, and we would often be on adventures out in wild places, and also sailing in oceans and things as well. Like they're very keen sailors and were always like maintaining their own little boat and stuff. So we, every chance we had, we'd be going off in those places. But I think I'm still curious, like you said. I just want to get a bit of context because I'm still trying to visualize like where you grew up. I know, excuse my shit geography,
It's
but
okay.
so you said Kalamazoo, which first of all is
Yeah.
an amazing sounding place. Is that right? Did I say it
Right.
right?
Yep, that's right. It
And
is.
whereabouts is that in the US? Um,
So
like,
Michigan, it's considered like Midwest.
okay,
It's not this sort of like technical Midwest like maybe Kansas is.
okay,
But they still like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. It's
okay.
all like we still call it the Midwest out there. It's not the East Coast, right? It's
Yes.
it's in a little bit more.
And
And
is it mid in terms of like north and south as
it's
well?
a little
Or
bit more on the north side.
okay,
Michigan is kind of famous for being surrounded by the Great Lakes. So Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, Erie,
okay.
Huron, etc. Yeah.
And the other thing I'm really curious about because I have like a newfound passion for canoeing as well.
Mm,
But like, so you were doing like river trips, or was it in the lakes, or what was that like?
yeah, rivers. Yeah, definitely. I did. Speaking of scouting, there's like this one particular badge that you can get for doing 100 miles or more. Um, Usually it's hiking,
Yeah,
but I've got a couple for hiking and I've got one for canoeing as well.
nice.
And it's a cumulative, right? So
Yes.
it wasn't like 100-mile plus trip,
Okay.
but that a lot of that entailed a lot of the rivers in Michigan. Michigan, besides being surrounded by the Great Lakes, it's got tons of rivers, and there's kind of like a lake in every neighborhood. It seems like
Yeah.
there's a lot of bodies of water there to explore.
That sounds like a pretty cool environment to grow up in. I mean,
It's cool, yeah.
it's so nice. I love canoeing in the rivers. Like, was it? Did you ever have to get through any rapidy type stuff? I guess portaging is always the option, but
Yeah, no, not anything too crazy.
okay.
More of the whitewater stuff seems to be. I got into a little bit of that out here in California. It's not, it's flatter out. It's flatter out there. Where here in California, it's a little bit more dynamic, so you get that really swift current.
Yes.
Since it's flatter out there, the water's just running a little bit more easy.
Yeah, it's definitely. I did a canoe trip not too long ago, when the rivers were really pumping after the snow melt and everything. When that started to melt. I think it was in like March, no, April or May kind of time.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I'm not super experienced, but I know enough. Like I've had a good teacher, and that was pretty wild. Like it was quite a few rapids that we went through.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff. It's fun. I wish I would have experienced more of that back home, but not so much. A little bit more tranquil water.
Yeah. But anyway, we digress. Sorry, I took us on a tangent there.
That's okay.
So you were talking about how, you'd spent your youth developing this connection with wilderness, and then maybe as you moved into the city, what city was that? San Francisco?
Yeah, I've lived in several different cities, but when I moved from Michigan, I kind of bounced around between San Diego and the Bay Area. Yeah, Oakland and Berkeley and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty big cities.
So what took you to the city? What drew you there? I mean, in some ways.
Well, honestly, I just wanted to, I guess I moved away from Michigan. I was probably around 20, I believe, and just wanted to get out and explore and see what else is there. And I always had my eye on California, I guess, just at that time being just like a punk kid and just into music and just DIY culture, skating, art, yeah, and music for sure. So all those things, and the weather, of course. Like Michigan's harsh, bro. Like it's tough. You gotta have thick skin there, and I think I did, but after a while, it just kind of gets old, and so that's kind of what shooed me out.
Yeah. And that's quite a big difference as well. Like I guess San Diego and San Francisco, pretty well, at least geologically, not geologically, geographically. That's the word. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally different. I mean, especially San Diego. It's kind of known to have the most consistent weather in the country, at like 77 degrees. That might be changing now because it seems like everything is weather-wise, but it was definitely a shock to not even see the seasons anymore. There's just, it's all palm trees and succulents and cacti, and they were amazing to take in all that stuff when you've never been around it. It's beautiful, but your kind of your internal clock for the seasons just gets all weird, and you don't have to plan your day around what the weather's going to be. It's just going to be perfect every day.
That's such a good point. I spent a bit of time in LA, or the LA area, for I don't know, a couple of years or so, and it's so true. I feel like time is just different, right? Like when there's no markers to break up how time is passing, you don't have a winter, you don't really. I mean, there are, but very subtly, like you can walk down the street, and some trees on the street are like in fall, and then the other ones are like blooming as if it's spring. Everything is confused by the weather.
It's true.
And it just kind of makes time. I think it makes time go faster in a way, because there's nothing making, creating gaps or creating a sense of time passing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, your own sense of mortality and gets skewed a little bit.
Yeah,
because that time just gets stretched.
So I guess then the next step is what tempted you out of the city? How long were you in the city? Like,
I mean, most of my life, really. I moved up here to Mendocino County. It's going on, I think, eight seasons now. So, but up until that, it was all big city. Again, access to parks, large parks, and regional parks and all that. But a lot of those places are really just they want you on the trail, and that's where you're not really gonna see too much activity, whether it's deer or animals, or and you're gonna run across more people and stuff too. So it was a way to kind of scratch the itch of the yearning to be outdoors and in the woods, but there still was something missing, and that I didn't really get to reconnect with until I moved up here.
Yeah. I think you told me a story before, but you came up here to Mendocino County just kind of like in a fleeting moment, right? And it wasn't even on your radar at that point. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So I was basically my fiance at the time, and I were open to a change. The
Yeah.
city lifestyle just wasn't working for us anymore. So we were open and not trying to throw too much direction into it. But I've found in life that just being open to different opportunities brings them about more readily. And so, in the act of just being open and just finally just being like, yeah, like if something else came about, let's explore what that looks like. And so, for me, it was a friend that was already living up here that was um, doing a couple specific jobs for a cannabis grower up here, which is less and less so now, but it's definitely been a big part of um, what's going on up here in Mendocino as far as the economy and all that kind of stuff. It's like kind of known for wine and cannabis, and
Yeah.
so a position opened up as a master grower for this farm up here, and I took a look at the farm and I saw a lot of ways that it could be improved. I thought I would be an asset to it, and so I ended up taking that position. And yeah, like you said, sort of on a whim. And I said, when we came up here to kind of scope things out, I was just blown away by Mendocino, and I was just like, holy crap, for years, the Humboldt Arcata area always really resonated with my heart. The redwood trees and those just dark, deep forests, and I always thought I would end up somewhere up there.
Hmm.
But after I saw Mendocino, I don't know, it just has a little bit more light to it, a little bit more openness, and is just as beautiful. Not more, but different.
Yeah.
So it just resonated with me like right away. And that gig I took um, only lasted a year, and the climate kind of changed for the cannabis industry up here. And so I was like, I don't want to move back to the city. I'm loving the country life, and as an artist and craftsman and somebody that can um, work from home in my own studio and stuff, it was, time to like sort of turn up that gear again. And I was kind of thirsty for that after just busting my butt doing this grower thing.
Yeah.
So I was really just like charged and just like, ready to make something happen up here for myself to just keep it all going, because I knew it's what I wanted.
Yeah. And I remember you saying to me in that year that you were working, that you had some time, you like the kind of the cycles of how that job worked was that you would have like periods of work in maybe the morning and periods in the afternoon or the evening, but you would have these long stretches of time that you would be able then free to just head off into the woods and and kind of experience nature. And was that where did the curiosity about mushrooms begin? Was that a product of just being wanting to go out there and experience the wild, or were you like, oh, I wonder if there's something I can find to nibble on out here?
Yeah. No, it kind of just, it all happened like very naturally. You're right. I did have this sort of like, my work schedule is working in the morning, working in the evening, and having a big window during the day. Um, Also, just before we moved up to Mendocino, I got myself a cattle dog, a blue heeler, and man, they need to be out a lot. So, he's partially, actually majorly responsible for just me getting out
Hmm.
more and just getting out into nature and getting out into the woods just because I needed to do it for his sanity and for mine, honestly. Um, as far as him driving me crazy, because they just get that way if they're not being active. So yeah, I was taking these middle parts of the day and just hitting the woods with my dog, basically.
Hmm.
Um, and so I took the job up here in the summertime, but it also happened to be segueing into one of the wettest rainy seasons we've had up here for a long time,
Okay.
and that's what just sort of naturally started to make mushrooms pop up all over the place up here. And the property that we were on was a 20 plus acre parcel, and I just started seeing these giant mushrooms pop up on the property. And I knew a little bit about mushrooms, and I was like, I think those are porcinis, and harvested a couple of them and kind of jumped online, did a bunch of research, and all signs pointed to positive ID on porcini. And
Nice.
so that's really what started, is like, these are giant mushrooms, the Boletus grand edulis. The grand edulis are the ones that are kind of here and native to California, that just get huge. You can't not see them. Um, so yeah, that was the mushroom that kind of started it all for me. And like I said, I ID'd it, and that evening, a buddy of mine decided, we were going to team up and make some risotto, and we made risotto, and it was just game changer. It was just like, oh my god, I can't believe this like delicious delicacy is like right outside my door, basically.
Yeah.
And then that's what kind of got me to start thinking like, well, what else is out there in the fungi world that I can explore, and how do I find more of these mushrooms? Like, where are they? Starting to pay a little bit more attention to like where I'm finding them, what kind of environments, what kind of trees and stuff.
Hmm.
Even though I wasn't totally aware of specific connections with trees and mushrooms, I knew that there had to be, that there were specific environments that they liked. So, but yeah, that risotto is kind of what just like got me going and started it all.
I love it. Opened the door.
It really did.
So so then I'm curious. It sounds like this sent you down the fungi rabbit hole. And was that like a self-taught kind of process, or how did you? Because obviously there's some elements of, if you're new to mushroom hunting, it can be a bit overwhelming and a bit intimidating at times. So if you were experiencing that, was that the case, or were you just researching online or through forums, or was it using books, or did you have like a mentor, or how did that work?
Yeah, so yeah, it's quite expansive and very, very daunting. But the cool thing that happened at basically that same time, that with that season kind of just being really wet and mushrooms just exploding, it also happened to be the same time that a local book for our area on mushrooms came out, called Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast.
Yeah.
And I saw in a local publication that one of the authors was going to be speaking in Mendocino Village. So, I chalked it on the calendar and made sure to go to this lecture. And, I did. I went. There was a pretty good crowd. Slideshow. There was a few tables full of just specimens.
Oh, really?
I remember I brought a specimen that I had no idea um, what it was, but common name is a pine spike. It's a Cortinarius. I had never seen it before. Thought it was like kind of rare up here or something, and Noah kind of looked at it. Was like, oh yeah, pine spike, and just set it on the table. It was just like, oh, I guess it's not so rare. But you know, that's kind of that was what really got me excited was knowing that there was this um, compendium collected of just mushrooms in our area because I had some guides previous, but a lot of the mushroom books of older days actually include mushrooms that wouldn't be growing in your specific region. They're kind of just like all over the nation. So there's a lot of pages and photos of mushrooms that I'll just never see because they're specific to the South or the East Coast or other regions that I wasn't in. So it's kind of like it's cool to know about those mushrooms being out there, but I wanted to know what was like under my feet, what was here. So having Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast being released right at the time that I got interested and being able to go see one of the authors speak about it and see the sort of like collective energy at that meeting of people being passionate about mushrooms. I didn't really know that was kind of a thing. I knew I was really excited about it, but I didn't realize that there were all these other people that were super excited about it too. So that was kind of the ultimate resource. That book really is kind of like the Bible for this area. And yeah, I just kind of like ran into the woods with that book, and I didn't have any mentors really. And that's when that was, I think, the first event that the Mendocino Coast Mushroom Club put on, and I signed up to be in that club, in that group, at that event. And I think the first meeting was like a couple weeks after that, and there's literally like 6 or 8 of us around a table. And now it's just like really blown up into this big thing, and there's a lot of people that come to our meetings. We had to change where we have it and all that stuff. So it wasn't just me that was excited, but just living out here so rurally and not knowing a whole lot of folks, really I was kind of my own teacher in a lot of ways. And I'm kind of grateful to that, for that. And of course the book was kind of like my teacher. And then joining the club and
Yeah.
just going to these meetings and being able to ask like elders and other folks that have lived here for quite a while and start, I was pretty quiet at these meetings. Actually, I was just letting people talk and taking notes, just like soaking it all in.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's I'm curious, you said that you're kind of in a way glad that you taught yourself a lot of this stuff. Why is
Uh,
that?
um, yeah, that's a good question. I think I go that way because um, I think my already instilled view on being in nature and really taking in the entire element, all the elements that are there, um, is something that I don't really see in a lot of like teacher, that are into mushrooms.
Hmm.
They kind of have their specific spots, or um, I think it just resonated with me a little bit more to just be like taking in everything and not just being focused in on just the mushroom being there,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
I think it does. I think it does. And so that actually like leans perfectly into a question that I wanted to ask you, which Yeah, it was interesting last time we had a conversation. It was fascinating to me hearing about your almost like your thought process or your vision about how you kind of perceive mushrooms in nature, because you said something to me that really sort of stuck in my mind, which is like, yeah, sure, you can go and look for mushrooms and you might find them, but like I'm not looking for mushrooms. That's what you said. Like I'm looking for like all of the signs that mean that mushrooms will be growing in this environment that's rich for them, you know?
Mm,
And so I guess like, if you don't mind sharing, what
yeah.
what is that? What's the overarching idea of your approach to mushroom hunting? Like, what is it like? What is the whole big picture that you approach it with?
Right. So, I guess as being like an artist and musician, one stance I've had along the way is, you're always going to be taking in influences, but I've never been one for like art school, like I would rather spend $20,000 on art supplies and to rent a empty studio somewhere than spend 20 grand like on tuition going to school and have somebody with the easel on each side of me and I'm looking at what they're doing. And I kind of like I don't I'd like to push away what could be influential to me in those kind of aesthetic ways. And maybe that's why I liked sort of being my own teacher out there as well. Is just I'm comfortable in that kind of space where it's just me exploring and working with what's there and what's in front of me. And so in doing so, walking into the woods, yeah, I'm just yeah, like you said, you can. I think I told you, you could you can just wander the woods and find mushrooms. You can come across them, but it's really about surveying the environment and microclimates and what trees are there and kicking the ground to see, what the duff is like, what the moisture content is, and just all of it. I want to see, I want to see everything that should be there. I want to see wildlife. I want to see deer. I want to see like scat from different animals and birds, and I really want that forest to be alive. To me, that's it signifies health and um, beauty and bounty and abundance, and it's a lot. It's just a lot easier when you know those things, where you know where mushrooms like to be and what trees they like to be. You can survey an entire landscape, 180, 360, you can just stand somewhere, turn around and just look at the valleys, look at the slopes, look at, all the different aspects that are in front of you that would lean a little bit more heavy towards where the mushrooms would like to be.
Yeah.
And so I could, this just a skill set from just doing it so much. And, I do it for folks that own their own properties that are curious about what's there. And it also makes it so you can do that kind of survey, whether it's dry and drought or wet out, because really it's eventually the rain is going to come. Eventually the mushrooms are going to pop, and
Yeah.
they're going to be in those same kind of spaces that are um, lead are just a little bit more healthier for them to be in.
And I think that's like there's a double or even a triple whammy about why that's such a good way of looking at the world, because the rainy season up here can really vary from year to year. It's been pretty good for the last, I guess, couple of years,
Yeah.
and that is sort of like very constant for particularly the last year, and that's probably like a good 6 months, 5-6 months of rain, right? But there
Yeah.
are other times when there's only 3 months of proper rain in the year, and so you
Or
don't want to
less.
cut your or less exactly. And at least this way of seeing the world differently means that you can be benefiting and kind of exploring and sort of basically searching for mushrooms even when they're not out, right? And that means that
Hmm.
you're checking things and kind of making notes of where stuff is. But so I'm curious as well then, like how is it just like miles getting, feet on the ground and taking your dog for a walk that you are discovering these places? Or are you doing any, pre-scouting at all? Like I know you mentioned to me before you use Onyx, which is kind of, a off-roading and hunting app, which has a lot of detailed information about topography and all that kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I didn't tap too much. I don't tap too into the apps to use them for hunting. There's better apps to do that where we'll actually flag spots where mushrooms are, like iNaturalist does
Okay.
that. And so a lot of people will look up, Amanita muscaria on iNaturalist, and they'll see all the places that it's been observed, and spots get a little bit heavier in some zones, and then okay, that mushroom flesh is there. It's That's definitely a great tool, but I wonder if it takes out some of the natural sort of learning of the environments um, that I was talking about earlier. Um, I'll be honest with you. I use Onyx to track myself, so I don't get lost. I
Okay.
don't really use it too much to study the topo. And then same with iNaturalist. I don't really use that to to hint me and clue me in onto where mushrooms are. I'm not against it. I know a lot of people do use it. But yeah, it is a lot of just like covering ground, and the more mushrooms that you find, the more environments you can wrap around it, and then eventually you start recognizing environments and can match up what mushroom you think you know will eventually be there. And
Yeah.
it was a little bit humbling, moving here in that wet season where mushrooms were just everywhere and you couldn't help but find them. So following that year, that's when we sort of like started to drop into a serious drought here. And but I was so just like pumped on mushrooms still that I was like, well, what can I do to like keep my this passion alive? And really, what that ended up being was just me paying more attention to those environments and doing a lot of hiking and a lot of exploring and looking for those environments and recognizing them in those drought down years. So it's kind of like, I'm not wasting my time out there because I'm basically, getting exercise, I'm getting my dog out there and all that, but I'm also environment hunting for when the timing is right, when the moisture is there. So I'm doing less scouting for these places when, maybe it's not wasting time, but, spending time looking for these places when it's wet. I already know where they are because I did the recon when it was dry.
Yeah.
So I can just go back in my head and be like, oh yeah, that there was like a lot of tan oaks in this area. So when black trumpet season comes along, I'll go back to that spot. So I'm not looking for spots that black trumpets may be. I already found those spots where they should be.
Yeah.
And then it's just like going in, and it's more just like picking mushrooms than hunting
Yeah.
mushrooms.
Yeah. It makes absolute sense. Why spend time looking for mushrooms when you could spend time harvesting them? you know?
Yeah, it goes back. It goes hand in hand, and on that point, I do consider a successful hunt, a mushroom hunt, just getting into the woods and getting out safely. That's like the main thing that you want. And if you observe some mushrooms, fantastic. If you find mushrooms worth harvesting, even better. But really, the joy should just be of just being out there and having a pleasant experience, maybe pushing yourself a little bit as far as, going off trail just a tad, just pushing your comfortable boundaries just a little bit so you can get more comfortable with being out there. But it's all about getting out there and having the experience of being with nature and getting home safely without being lost or getting hurt.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We're probably going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but it's
Okay.
interesting what you said there. And, it's going off trail is, I mean, it's inherent in any kind of hunting. I think you've got to get away from the well beaten path, right? The well trodden track. But, and I think it's cool that you're saying that, getting home safely is the main goal. Of course. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. But have there ever been any moments when you've kind of, I guess, like an inherent product of going off trail so far all the time, and the fact that you're so driven to just always be off in places where there is nobody. Have you ever had any moments where you're like, oh, that was a bit dicey, either with like animals or people? I know like that area in Mendocino and north of there can be a lot of like, illegal grows, or there can be other things going on that you could stumble into. Has anything like that ever happened?
Yeah, I guess all of the above. I've come across sketchy people in the woods. I've come across lots of bears,
Yeah.
especially over the last like year and a half. Um, and I've come across a lion before, and I've come across abandoned grows too.
Okay.
So yeah, all that stuff is in there, and it's all stuff that I think, you know, rightfully keeps people at bay, keeps people on the main trails, and unfortunately, maybe overall for some people, it keeps them from, exploring the woods. Um, I will say that, being, a 6'3" male changes things.
For sure.
I'm very aware of that, and I never try, to push people too much out of their comfort zone. And I think people should be comfortable most times in the woods if they can, as far as like, how far they're exploring and what kind of land they're on. Is it private property, stuff like that. Um, so I just I did get more and more comfortable the more I did it.
Yeah.
And initially, I was, a lot of mushrooms love to pop like right off the trail.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many times you don't have to go, that deep, which it's cool. Makes it makes it exciting for maybe elderly people that can't go that deep, or can't physically go that off of trail. So I appreciate those kind of mushrooms, but mostly those kind of mushrooms are what we call flags. So if you see a mushroom kind of proud on the side of the road or on the side of a trail, it's kind of we call them flags because they're kind of indicating that you're in the right spot, and that environment is correct. So if I see something right off the road, like, porch around here, we call it window shopping, where you're just like driving slow in your car or on your bike, or whatever. Usually in your car, you're just kind of creeping along these like logging roads and back roads until you see a flag, a,
Yeah.
a, 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 a proud porcini or other mushroom that's there. Then you kind of get out and you kind of peek around, then you start going behind the curtain, just pushing beyond those huckleberries and ferns, and you start finding more mushrooms, and that's what kind of pulls you
Hmm.
off of that trail and into the woods a little bit deeper to explore. And you're usually going to find more, um, if you do that. And to me, it's a little bit more exciting than having it just be literally in your path, where you almost like are stepping on them, or you're like just kicking them over on a stroll. It's
Yeah.
that's where the hunting part comes in with foraging for mushrooms, is seeing those flags, reading the environment, and dipping uh, beyond that veil into the forest to really hunt.
Yeah. It's interesting. The term I've never heard that term, but it's a good one. Like the flags. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely it's maybe a similar story to you, but like much more recently. It was only 2 or maybe 3 years ago when the rain started coming down more heavily that it was the flags. When I was hiking in the woods a lot and happened to see a bunch of mushrooms, it was almost, at that point it had been dry so long and the mushrooms were so prolific. They were everywhere. You're practically tripping on them. And now I guess I understand that that's what they were. They were flags. But I guess the other question I have about that is, do you know why that is? Because it seems like so many times when I'm hiking trails, they seem to just really love collecting. And that could be, you know, chanterelles, lobsters, porcinis. Like I've seen loads of them always just collecting along the edge. It's that like edge area between a path where it's more open and then just into the woods just a touch. For some reason, I
Yeah.
don't know. Do you know why that is? Like what causes that?
There's it probably can go many different ways, and different people will give you different answers. But for me, what I've connected with in viewing this is, so if you imagine that mycelium layer being just beneath the surface of the soil, just an inch, 2 inches, few inches, it's just below that path. And what I believe is happening is, I think that the mycelium is being stimulated by the vibrations of people walking by, running by, cruising through on their mountain bike. And it's that stimulation that sort of excites the mycelium in those areas and sort of like massages the mycelium to fruit along those paths and roadsides. I think it's the vibration, and sometimes it's also the disturbance of like creating that trail. Mushrooms like disturbance. They like to, you clear a zone in the woods somewhere, and you'll be surprised at the amount of species that will just pop up in that kind of an area. So yeah, I think it's the disturbance of the establishment of those trails and roads, and the vibrations of just people coming and going, and deer and other creatures using those trails. I see the same thing happen off of game trails too. It's not just the human created trails that are out there.
That's so
That's
interesting.
my theory.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never really thought about that, but it does make a lot of sense. If there's this kind of interconnecting network of, I guess, how would you describe it? Like strands, the mycelium. Like that's so cool. I never really thought about it that way. That we could be actually having an effect ourselves, and like the trails and everything. That's super interesting.
Yeah, and if you get into the psyche of the mushroom, which is something I like to go into and explore too. It's, I feel that a lot of fungi like to be found too. They like to be observed. They like to be harvested. They like to be used and shown proudly.
Yeah,
Um, that's like maybe going a little bit more esoteric and more mystical connection with them, but I don't know, that's part of my life anyway. So
yeah,
I just naturally go there. So yeah, maybe they're on the trails because they want to be seen, they want to be found, they want to be observed, and they want
yeah.
to have that connection with us too.
That's. I mean, the thing as well is that we're learning so much so quickly, right? About mushrooms and that. I'm sure there's so much that we don't understand. So the idea of consciousness or all kinds of the interconnectivity and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure in time there'll be like new developments and understandings about what's going on with them, because it's like I'm new to the whole thing, but it is a kind of baffling and interesting world, right? Like you've got this thing where they're not. Someone said to me that they're actually closer related to humans than they are plants. Is that correct? I can't remember if that's right.
Yeah, I mean, they're somewhere in the middle. You know, they're not plants. It's their own kingdom,
Yeah.
and you know you know they're kicking out CO2 just like we do. You know, plants kick out oxygen.
Mm.
So, in that regard alone, they're similar to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. So so okay. So I'd love to hear like a bit more information in terms of, say someone is relatively new to mushroom hunting, or they've been doing it a bit but they'd love to just kind of get like a an overarching idea about what the essentials are. If okay, you want to start mushroom hunting, and I know that it's going to vary from place to place, but I was wondering if you could maybe just give an idea about like, you know, essential equipment. Like, what is the stuff that you need? What is the stuff that you don't need? Are there like books that are really good reading? I mean, obviously you've mentioned before the book here is Mushroom of the Redwood Coast. I actually have it. I'm looking at it here on my bookshelf right now.
Great, it's a great one.
So yeah, is there, you know,
So,
what's
like,
the,
where to start, and no
yeah,
matter where you're at, um, I would say, yeah, try and track down a localized guide, uh, book, publication, pamphlet, anything that's like specific to where you're at. That'll give you a good sense of like, you know, what's out there and what the possibilities are as far as like what can be found. You don't want to have mushrooms on your radar or in your head that you've got no chance of finding because they're not in your area at all.
yeah,
So, some kind of like local book or guide, or, you know, it could be an online resource too. Um, your local mushroom group is a great place to start. So you can, you know, go to these meetings, and at this point they're in almost all regions, and so you can be part of these groups and go to the meetings and learn more about what's in your area, and when to go and stuff like that. If you can get a referral to somebody that's local to your area too, that would be willing to take you out under their wings, or go to a talk and walk that they do if it's like more of a group kind of setting.
hmm,
I do those around here, and I know that I've helped a lot of people that either come up to this region that don't live here to hunt, or that already live here and just want a little bit more of a hands-on approach to it. And then, you know, also you need to, just like anything that you want to be good at, you need to have, um, you know, you need to push yourself in that direction, and find whatever it is that inspires you to encourage yourself to like get out there and spend the time in the woods looking around. You can do tons of, you know, I pump myself up pretty good on with different mushroom books and guides as to like what is out there, but I just had like no idea like where to look for these things.
mm,
And a lot of guidebooks will say, you know, okay, this kind of bolete, you know, fleshes with spruce trees, but you can literally drive 45 minutes and that's not true anymore. So
okay,
the local groups and stuff are like really helpful in that way. And a lot of the older guides too will just say, you know, with conifers, or with deciduous trees or something like that. It's very sort of cut and dry. What's nice about mushrooms of the Redwood Coast, for instance, is, you know, I tell everybody it's all about the first, you know, dozen pages of that book. Um, and those first pages are all about the trees, all about the tree associations. And that's really where a lot of, you know, newbies and mushroom foraging go wrong, is they don't put enough emphasis on those tree associations, and they just march out into the woods and just try to find mushrooms. And again, that's fine. It's getting people out there. They're having an experience. They might be finding stuff, but they might not. And if you're looking for mushrooms, it's a lot more fun when you actually find them and not get skunked, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit, it can be a little bit defeating. But again, going back to what I said earlier, if you chalk up a successful hunt as being safe and getting in and out and having a beautiful experience in nature, then that takes a little bit of the pressure off. That's what I did for myself early on. It's like, well, I'm still getting out there, I'm getting exercise and getting in there. So anyway, yeah, the local groups, the localized books or publication or online resources. Sometimes there's local classes at community colleges, and just trying to find somebody that maybe you've heard a reputation that they're a good hunter and that they're also willing to teach. You know, a lot of, in my experience, a lot of mushroom hunters are somewhat like kind of loners, or you know, maybe they are good with people, but that's kind of like their alone time. That's like their church, you know, and that's kind of how it was for me.
Yeah.
And it took a little bit, it took a little bit of like guiding people and taking groups out and taking individuals out and doing some of the talk and walks to get me sort of excited about it too, because what really fired me up was how excited people would get when they found the mushrooms while they're with me. You know, first time finding chanterelles or porcini or whatever it is. That's what kind of like sort of broke me out a little bit more of just being, having this just be this alone time with just me and my dog in the woods, or me and my wife and my dog, or just by myself. It kind of opened it up to this more of a communal experience to have with other people.
Yeah. I've got to make a confession.
Okay.
I think I'm one of the people in my, you know, it's my early years of mushroom hunting, but I'm definitely I think I've just been benefiting from dumb luck and like hours you know, putting boots on the ground. But I don't put enough time into understanding the environment. I just go and I think look for mushrooms. That's not entirely true. I have almost like retroactively figured things out a bit myself, or I've recurringly found mushrooms of a certain kind in certain areas, and then I'm like, oh, I just get a feeling for like, okay, in previous situations I found these mushrooms. But yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to read that first section of the Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast book again, and really start to try and digest my environment better, because I think that's going to help me get to the next level.
Yeah, I mean that really is the next level, is just taking in those environments. Whenever you harvest a mushroom or observe a mushroom and it's something you want to find more of, just slow down and take a look around. What tree is it? What tree is it under? What other trees are around? Maybe it's the association isn't the tree that it's under. Maybe it's a pine that you can't even really see
Hmm.
because the forest is too dense. But it's you know, in the distance somewhere. You know, I kind of look at, you know, with tree associations. You know, I've had, you know, people say stuff like, oh, these porcinis are flushing with these ornamental bamboo that I have in my backyard. You know, I've literally heard that before, and it's like, no, that's not really what's happening there. And you know, if I think about it, it's like, well, you know, what bamboo are good at is siphoning water straight down.
Hmm.
You know, what I know that's happening in that situation is there's pines off that property somewhere nearby. And so if you take a tall pine tree and you fell it,
Yes.
say it's like 100-foot tree, and you
Hmm.
fell that tree, Maybe add another, 50 feet to that distance or so, and you're in the zone of the mushroom associating with that tree. So
Okay.
that could be kind of off in the distance. Like I said, may not be the mushroom may not be under the tree that it's associating with, but it's gonna be around. It's somewhere. Those porcini are not flushing with non-native uh, bamboo, but the bamboo is bringing that moisture in there at a hyper rate compared to the rest of the environment around it.
That's
And
so
those
interesting.
and those pine trees are beyond that bamboo stand where you can't see.
Yeah.
So different ornamentals and different there's could just be the where the runoff, the gutters run off onto your property throws more moisture in this one particular area that your roses are with or something.
Hmm.
So, and some people are like, oh, they like the roses. No, they're not liking the roses. They like all the extra moisture that's showing up there because you have your gutters laying that way.
Yeah, that's really makes a lot of sense, and it makes me realize some of the errors of my thinking because very recently I was, well, in the past actually, I found some lobster mushrooms in like a certain area where it produces a lot of them,
Hmm.
but they're often under huckleberries. Is that right?
Okay.
Yeah, and so I was thinking, oh, maybe it's the huckleberries that they're connected with, but there's literally them being that close is not necessarily the the determining factor.
Not
Am
yeah,
I completely mistaken?
not necessarily. It depends on the mushroom, and I will say that I all I know is that I don't know. So I'm always open to these different circumstances that may arise, and nature does what she wants when she wants.
Hmm.
But so in your specific case with the lobster mushrooms, if I go in my head and I look at some of the environments that I've found really nice fleshes of lobster mushrooms, there's no huckleberry around.
Hmm.
But there are ferns and there's other maybe salal and other low laying vegetation.
Okay.
And what low laying vegetation usually translates in my head is that it's keeping moisture in there, right? So that ground isn't exposed to sunlight and
Hmm.
airflow as much that can dry it out.
Hmm.
So those short little huckleberries and the ferns and the salal and all the things that are growing within say a foot or two of the ground are keeping that moisture retained in there. And I
Okay.
think that's what your mushroom spot, that your lobster spot. I think that's what the lobsters are liking about that zone. It's
Yes.
not specifically that the huckleberries are
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
but it's that the moisture is being retained there a little bit better than say an open area.
Interesting. It also I noticed in that area, and I've got another question for you after this, but I'm just too fascinated to stop. Um, it's also this area where I found them. It always seems to be the area where there's a bigger flush is like just at the edge, beginning of a ridge line. Like it's on those little slightly flatter patches. You're walking your way up the hillside, and then you get to like one of those natural tiny little fingers. Like a finger ridge, and it's that point where the finger ridge is, and then coming off the edges of those banks for some reason I found a few of the like tops of the fingers there. That just seems to be where they've been. Does that make sense as
Mm-hmm.
well?
Yeah, it does. And that scenario is different for all different kinds of mushrooms too.
Okay.
Some mushrooms really like that. Um, but what's interesting to note after uh, you staying interested in hunting mushrooms and checking the spot you're talking about out every season,
Hmm.
you'll probably notice that flush will move a little bit.
Yeah, it
So
did.
it did, huh?
Hmm.
So it might go up on that ridge a little bit more. It might start to go down, and the mycelium is kind of it's always growing and expanding, and maybe sometimes shrinking. So
Oh.
it's like it's moving around a little bit depending on what it's getting hit with, what it's encountering. Is the soil changing? Is it drier soil? Is it creeping up onto a ridge side where it's getting like more wind flow, so it's actually drier? So then the mycelium kind of pulls back a little bit and might seek out a different area. But overall, what I've found in most patches is they migrate a little bit, and it's kind of cool to see that. I've definitely picked porcinis season after season in the exact spot. Like, you recognize the tree. If you're down on your knees, you're down in there. My wife is always like, how do you remember like these exact spots? And I don't really have that great of uh, a memory, or long term, even short term, it seems like. But I always remember where I pick a mushroom for some reason. I think that's because it's hitting like all the it's hitting all the senses, and it's more of a encompassing experience that I'm having. It's not just me looking at a page in a book. It's me, smelling, smelling the air, and just like digging into the ground and just looking all around like I always do when I find a good spot. So you'll probably find that your patches move around a lot, and it keeps things exciting. Sometimes it's quite a bit of a distance.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not there at all. I just recently hit up some of my best summer chanterelle spots, and although we haven't had a whole lot, it's early September now. We haven't had a whole lot of rain here. There was like no action there at all. If I would have just walked across that spot this year and just seen one mushroom like I did this time, I might think, oh, that's just a random fruiting. Nothing happened in here, just keep looking. But it's actually a prolific spot
Yes.
that I've harvested, just, baskets full in that same zone. So there's always that ebb and flow, and I think it's good because it makes us more grateful for those years in bounty when the patches are really producing and you're able to harvest a lot. It just keeps it more dynamic.
It's it's actually interesting. You mentioned then, like, baskets full, and that kind of brings me into, maybe we've just gone like very detailed in like certain aspects, which I think is great. And if you're open to it, and maybe in another episode in the future, I'd love to pick your brains for like the more detailed nuances of mushroom behavior and kind of some of the next steps. If that's something that we could do, that would be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But like, for people who are like complete rookies, what's the kind of stuff, like you're saying, a basket, is that the best way of transporting mushrooms? Because
Oh,
in the past,
right.
I've used paper bags and those kinds of things. Is that the kind of stuff that people use?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I guess you did have that as part of your question earlier, as far as like what to sort of arm yourself with when you go out there.
Yeah, like the basics.
Hmm. So, the clothing, I like long sleeves. I like, tough pants. I like, if it's raining, you got to have the rain gear, so good rain pants and stuff like that. Um, I also always wear a hat. I'm kind of a hat guy anyway. But when you're charging into the woods and into the vale, it's like really nice to have a sturdy hat where you can kind of like go head first through,
Hmm.
and not have just stuff in your hair and all that.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good point.
yeah, and then good boots, with good tread. Something that I like them better than like hiking, like running, hiking kind of shoes. Like, you want something that maybe goes up a little bit higher. My boots pretty much are just kind of like sturdy, kind of vintage leather boots with good tread. I always like that kind of setup, but I also have like muck boots that go up about 12 13 inches or so, that
Hmm.
I use when I know it's going to be wet and boggy out.
Okay.
So in mushroom season, in the wet parts of the year, I always have those in my truck, just in case. And sometimes you literally can't access a trail or access a part of the woods that you want to get into unless you have like some good muck boots or rain boots
Yeah.
on. But you definitely want something good with treads.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and yeah, I like sturdy, like strong pants too, because there's a lot of bending over, and barbed wire sometimes, and just stuff. There's tons of stuff that can just like scratch at you, and even like I recently got stung by some weird black hornet thing,
Oof.
and I realized that even before I went into the woods, I didn't really like the pants I had on. They were a little bit thinner. Had I had on some thicker pants, maybe that sting wouldn't have got through where it did.
Yeah. Ugh.
Um, so yeah, your clothing, all that stuff is super helpful. And it's if you're going out there with a short sleeve shirt and you're kind of like picking near brambles and stuff, you get scratched up. It takes out of the experience, and it kind of makes you want to call it a day a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Or if the rain picks up and you weren't ready for it, you're getting wet, but you're in a great patch, or you're having good luck and a good day out there. It's kind of a drag to have to change gears and do a 180 and just retreat because you weren't prepared for it. That's where the Boy Scout stuff comes in. The whole be prepared motto that they have. So yeah, that kind of just like garb is like super important. Um,
So say also like processing mushrooms in the field, like I use a brush and a knife, but is there like certain knives or brushes that are better, or does it not really matter?
oh, I'm
And also, I guess
I'm
like,
so glad you brought this up. Because I do make my own mushroom harvesting knives that I started off just making for me and my wife and friends, but it's kind of turned into this little side business doing it for a lot of folks because when I first started, yeah, I was carrying a paintbrush, or eventually I think I got my brush of choice was like a men's shaving brush where you would apply
yeah, yeah.
shaving cream. I really like that kind of a brush. So I went through different brushes and different knives, straight knives, fixed blades, folding blades, like all the stuff. And, basically like boiled it down to is like I want like somewhat of a short blade that is curved, not straight, because it's a lot less dangerous in the woods. And I wanted a brush that was on my knife too. I didn't want to have two separate tools to process.
Yeah.
And the mushroom knives that were out there just had this really short, stubby, too firm of bristles on this little brush, and it was almost doing more damage to the mushrooms than good. So I kind of devised these knives that have a really good brush that's kind of modeled after that shaving brush, and a nice curved blade and a larger handle that just feels really good in hand. So once I developed that and started using it, it was just like a game changer. And um, that's the only tool that I really use for harvesting mushrooms. And a lot of my friends that are, from newbies to like pros, like also just love it. It is a game changer.
Nice.
So I always have that. Let's see, basket versus bag versus um, paper bag versus backpack, all that.
Yeah.
I started off, so I apply those to different scenarios. I think about where I'm going to be. Is it public property? Is it private property? What kind of mushroom is it? Is it mushroom that will damage itself under a lot of weight? What is the terrain like? I started off with a basket my first year, a pretty good sized basket, and had it pretty full with, like, I remember I had porcinis, yellowfoot, and puffballs in it.
Hmm.
And I stepped on this wet log, slipped, my arm went up and around, and all the mushrooms just went like everywhere.
Oh,
And I'm glad I learned that like early on.
yeah.
So all my mushrooms got kind of damaged, and just I had to pick everything. You know, I was picking mushrooms twice that day, and I just said, you know, I'm not. I don't think I'm a basket guy. You know, I don't think I like this technique. So I switched really quick to like a rucksack, like a nice. The bag I use is like a vintage Swiss uh, military bag, or definitely like kind of like a outdoors hiking kind of, but it's definitely old, and it has, you can pull the inside up and expand the bag to like twice its size. It's canvas, so it breathes a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I like to put a paper bag inside that bag and put the mushrooms in. And when that gets almost full, I kind of like crinkle the top of it down, and I'll put another paper bag right on top of that.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of carting around. Um, and I like that for like porcini, um, you know, baskets. So I will use baskets from time to time, but it's more that, so, you know, if you've got a backpack on, you can be doing anything in the woods, right? You could just be
Yeah.
hiking, you can be going for a picnic. You're not really advertising what you're up to.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
you're walking around somewhere with a basket, you're kind of advertising that you're like foraging something, most likely mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on the area. Like if it's somewhere private where I know no one's gonna be, and it's like say chanterelles where I want to keep them maybe a little bit more airy and can be a little bit more gentle with them.
Yeah.
Um, then I might go for a basket, and then what I'll usually do is put like a cloth over the top to keep pine needles and stuff like that off of them,
Yes.
because they'll get loaded with all kinds of debris using a basket,
Okay.
depending on the environment.
Hmm.
So, um, you know, I kind of change what I bring. For smaller mushrooms like candy caps or hedgehogs, what I tend to do is have that rucksack backpack set up, but I'll also carry a small basket, like where the diameter is like, you know, maybe 8 inches or so,
Okay.
because it kind of takes a sec to fill that basket.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just empty that into my bag and the rucksack. So I'm taking off my backpack not very often, just,
Yes.
you
Okay.
know, after that small basket gets filled. So it just makes things a little bit more swifter and easier to manage, because you're not lugging around a big fat basket trying to maneuver. You just have a small hand basket. Um, you know, a lot of like commercial pickers and pro pickers like to use these mushroom crate and frame backpack setups, where they take the crates and they affix them with like bungees and zip ties and whatnot, where you can stack, you know, 3 or 4 of those onto kind of an old-fashioned aluminum frame pack.
Hmm.
And you know, that's definitely for the more serious hunter, somebody that's going deeper and really collecting a lot of mushrooms. It sure saves a lot of like going back and forth. It's a
Yeah.
bit harder to navigate through tighter brush and stuff with a pack like that.
Yeah.
I've I've I feel that with that rucksack, that Swiss rucksack setup with the pull-out extension of the bag, I can compete like pretty good with those kind of commercial type of crate setups on the frame. And then I might carry a couple of plastic bags, as like, okay, I really got in the thick of it. I've got tons of fruits to bring out of the forest. My rucksack is loaded up. I've got these plastic bags that I'll load up, and I'll hand carry 1 or 2 of those out with me. So you're really loaded, And then, as soon as I get back to my truck, I'm emptying those plastic bag full of mushrooms into like crates where they can breathe. You
Yes.
don't
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't you don't want plastic bag in general for mushrooms because there's different um, you just want as much aeration all the time, and different mushrooms sometimes put out different chemicals and stuff too, where they'll start to like suffocate themselves and break down and even heat up in the case of like morels, for
Really
instance. If they're too packed and not aerated, that center will start to get heated and start to break down the mushrooms, and they'll
interesting.
just be mush after a while. So it depends on
Oh,
what mushrooms you're hunting, or what mushrooms you think you might come across. It depends on if it's public or private, or if there's other people around. It depends on um, if you're going to just be loading up on like black trumpets or something, you're going to want, you know, either that crate kind of like commercial picker setup, or the backpack like I've got with additional bags to get out. I've hiked out with probably as much as 65, 70 pounds worth of mushrooms in one haul. And
wow.
it gets a little awkward and it gets heavy. Um, so I just kind of want to, and you're usually pretty deep, so you want to be prepared to be able
Yeah.
to get them out.
It's funny you say that because I was just thinking, I mean, like that's super helpful, man, and it's so good to hear you break down your whole thought process of how every part of the gear and the different approaches. It's really good to hear that because I've kind of done things my own way, and it sounds in some ways like I actually have like a hunting backpack, and that opens from the front as well as the top, so that's very convenient. It can zip open, and what I usually do is put some cardboard boxes, like small ones, like the little ones that you
Uh-huh.
can put in there. And so I don't know if that's breathable enough, but having those stacked in facing sideways means that it's like a bit of protection from other mushrooms, and you can
Sure.
like compartmentalize it a little bit, and
Yep, yep.
it's probably not quite the volume. You can get like quite a good weight of mushrooms in there, but you got to be aware, obviously, as well.
Right.
But
No,
the thing
that's a
that you were
good.
saying, you think that sounds good?
I think that's a good idea for some stuff for sure, because it breaks down the amount of stress that's on the mushrooms below it, right?
Yes, that's what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So great for like black trumpets or something like that,
yeah.
where if I'm loading up that whole rucksack, I'm usually, like I said, I do that bag techniques. Kind of
Hmm.
serves that same purpose as you doing the boxes, where
Yeah.
you don't fill the paper bag all the way to the top, so you can kind of roll the top of that bag down a little bit,
Mm.
and it creates like a little buffer zone when you put the next bag on top of
Yes.
it, and you might
Okay.
be putting another bag on top of that.
Yeah.
So it just adds a little bit of rigidity, it protects the mushrooms, and gives a little bit of a buffer. It's the
Yeah.
same thing you're doing with the cardboard boxes.
So, yeah, that makes absolute sense. And then I guess also it's a bit of a juggle understanding what the sturdiest mushroom is going at the bottom and all that kind of stuff, right? There's an
Oh
order.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm curious. Like I've had this question in my mind. I've wanted to ask you for a while. You're saying that you've walked out with, big backpack full, bags full. Do you have any stories of like that come to mind of like the biggest haul that you found, the biggest load of mushrooms, or maybe it was when you just started in the first giant haul of mushrooms that you found? I feel like a good story like that before we
Oh
before
yeah.
we wrap it up.
Um, I think I know my best day for porcini was definitely over 100 pounds and maybe like 5, 6 hours.
Wow.
Um, that was pretty great because I planned on car camping, and I filled up the car with so many mushrooms I had nowhere to sleep. So I ended up driving home late in the fog and got home super late. But the plan was to stay out there a couple days and really load up, and I just kind of knocked it out of the park right away. But that's it's really difficult to do that kind of a load with porcinis without breaking up the coming and going.
Yes.
So there's no way I'd be able to walk out of the woods with 100 plus pounds of porcini. It's just those mushrooms are a lot bigger. It's more of a game of Tetris as far as like putting them in your pack and or whatever your setup is, to really optimize space. So, and that actually was last season. I've had plenty of 50, 60 plus porcini hauls, but breaking 100 in that short a time. I mean, I was just exhausted.
Yeah.
But also just supercharged because I had never really seen. And I was by myself too. I didn't have anyone to sort of like help share that. And that was pretty beautiful. And then those other larger like 60 plus pound days would definitely be black trumpets where they can kind of like condense a little bit and kind of black trumpets are pretty resilient, kind of
Yeah.
rubbery in a
Yes.
way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do that with a lot of other mushrooms are just too delicate. And it depends on if I want stuff for particular restaurants. I sell to double Michelin star restaurants, and they wouldn't want their chanterelles like in five different one mushroom in five different pieces. So it kind of depends on what the mushroom is, sort of dictates for me how much I'm willing to pack and haul out in a comfortable for me rate, and I also want the specimens to look the most beautiful they can if I'm presenting them to restaurants or individuals for sale. Black trumpets are a lot more resistant to weight and damage, and a lot of times they just get dried anyway because they're a great mushroom to reconstitute. So I'm not so worried about how they're going to look in the end.
Yes.
But yeah, black trumpets are they can be so prolific out here that definitely like my biggest loads have been black trumpets across the board, and then chanterelles are probably a close behind just because they're a lot weightier of a mushroom.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I would never have imagined you could have such a heavy load with black trumpets, because I guess in my mind, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but they're a bit of a smaller mushroom. Like it's a high frequency, like there's a lot of individuals making up that weight. Is that right? Like they're not huge.
It really depends. I think a lot of folks pick black trumpets way too young.
Oh, okay.
Everyone's kind of like really excited for them to kind of get on the boards, and as soon as they see them, they start picking them, 2-3 inches in height. And to me, that's just too young. I have a tendency to just sit back during that time and let the mushrooms get bigger. But black trumpets can get huge, man. 9 inches.
Really?
In height, somewhere around there. I've had huge trumpets before.
Wow.
And, you're doing a lot less picking when they're bigger. And, if you let them ride a little bit longer, they'll get a lot bigger. So they'll be a little bit more resilient. And the black trumpets we have on the coast are a bit more thin-walled and delicate than the ones that are inland a little bit. The ones inland will almost have like 2, sometimes like 3, like I call them walls.
Yeah.
Where like the structural integrity of the mushroom is a lot firmer and thicker, and you can almost like split it, like pull it apart in these different walls.
I've noticed that exact thing. That's interesting. Well, if you've ever find yourself in surrounded by mushrooms and there's just too many for you to take home and you're overwhelmed and you need help carrying them out, I'll happily bring my backpack and help you. At no fee of mushroom, I'll happily just
I could use that
help
kind
you
of
carry them out.
I could use that kind of help sometimes, but I don't know if I'll be able to call you. And that backs me up a little bit towards your question about like stuff to bring when you go for a hunt. Is I definitely wanted to add in that folks should have like either a map of the area that they're in, a physical fold-out map, or something like your cell phone with there's several different apps that will track you.
Hmm.
There's
Downloadable maps.
yeah, downloadable maps, and there's different apps that you don't have to have a connection to have out in the woods, so you're not draining your battery as you're moving along. So definitely want to do a little bit of research at home into the area that you're going to be in.
Yeah.
It's super important, and it plays into just that whole getting out of the woods safely.
Exactly.
That we all
Yeah.
want to have.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, man, bring some empty backpacks, and I can load you up for sure. Hopefully.
No, amazing. Okay, so thanks again for all the information, dude. That was so enlightening. It was brilliant. Like to hear so much information, and I'm sure I'm going to have a bunch more questions for you in the future. So, if possible, I'd love to have you back on the show at some point.
Let's do
Pick
a
your
part
brain
2 and beyond. I love talking about mushrooms. I love getting into all the details and idiosyncrasies about all of it. I like covering the stuff that you can't read about or that people may not like to share.
Yes.
That it's like kind of like these secrets or whatever. But it's you can give people all the tools, but they still need to apply those tools, and they still need to put them into practice to really be able to understand how to utilize them to their fullest. And that's not everybody.
Yeah.
But if it happens to be you, then I think you're deserving of that skill set and that knowledge. And I think it's a beautiful thing to pass on and along, and maybe you'll riff off of what I do, or the examples that I set, to come up with new examples and new procedures and new ways that you can then share
Pass
with
on.
me or others and pass on. And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
we all just get more informed and better at what we love to do, and that's just beauty in life.
It's actually something someone said to me a long time ago, and not related to even the outdoors or wild places, but they said something that really changed my viewpoint, and maybe has an influence on why I'm doing this now. But it's easy if you're like in a career or you're trying to achieve things. It's easy to feel competitive with other people, and it's easy to feel like, oh, I don't want to show what I've got. I don't want to share my knowledge. Or I don't want to share those things. But what that person said to me was like, open up, share everything you have, and it will encourage people to do the same with you. And everyone will be better for it, and everyone learns faster, grows better. And it's like, by not being precious, you're just accelerating the mothership quicker,
Right.
And it's a great kind of frame of mind. And I love that you think about it in that way too. So amazing. So thanks again. And then also an important question is, how can we find you? How can we follow you? And where can we find those precious brushes, knife brushes? Do they have a specific name?
Well, the name of that little biz is called Lone Wolf Mushroom Knives.
Okay.
Folks can find those and follow my mushroom adventures on Instagram. I'm sure you'll toss all the links.
Yep, all in the bottom in the show notes.
So if people just go down there, they'll be able to find me on Instagram, on Facebook, both as an individual and for some of these different items that I make. And then my wife and I also have a little business called Born Free Natural Mystic, which kind of encompasses almost everything that we do, from art to the knives to seed collecting to dried mushrooms to just all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of a wide umbrella too, and folks can go check that out as well.
Amazing. Great stuff, man. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you again. And let's catch up soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the well thought out questions and getting me excited. I kind of want to go pick some mushrooms right now. They got to be out there somewhere. I'll find them.
Nice.
Thanks so much, Robin.
No, thank you. So that wraps up another episode. Thanks again to Billy for all the stories and tips. Hopefully, we'll be harvesting more nuggets from him in the future. Links to his products, store, and social stomping grounds can be found down in the show notes. Also, if you happen to be enjoying the show, please take a moment to share it with a friend, an enemy, or anyone in between.